Sean Powery, thanks again for coming back to us and talking to us about your experiences as a Mormon missionary when you were over here in England, back when you were about 19 years old.
Awesome. Yeah, happy to be back.
And thank you so much. You in our first part, in part one, you talked about being selected to be a Mormon missionary, and then what it was like in the MTC of the missionary training school, and leaving home, and then, of course, living in another country with your companion and all the rules that you had to deal with. And now I think what we could start talking about now is, if you like, the corporate culture. You were expected really to get out there and sell the Mormon church, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually joked with some of my colleagues, because obviously some of my colleagues know that I'm an ex-Mormon, and I've had some discussions with them. And I've said, once you've spent 2 years selling religion, you can sell almost anything else. So it's actually been very useful to learn how to sell religion, because now I do digital marketing and I actually know how to sell it. So yes, when you're a missionary, life changes, because being a normal sort of chapel Mormon, someone who goes to church, it's more about, quote unquote, the spiritual. You're not really exposed to any of the corporate culture of the LDS church. But becoming a missionary, you get exposed to that for the first time. So yes, you basically are a voluntary unpaid salesman, and you have KPIs. Now, I'll go through the KPIs briefly. So the first thing I'd like to say is Mormons, missionaries call someone who is looking into the church an investigator. So that's the name. You yourself have been called an investigator by those missionaries who've come and visited you, or you've talked with them. So the KPIs focus around investigators. So the first one is every week you have to report these. You report them to your local missionary leader, who's called a district leader.
Mm-hmm.
And they report it up the chain to the top. And in fact, the numbers for every single area are accessible right at the top of the church. So the first one is investigators baptized and confirmed. How many people did you baptize this week? Then the second one is how many have a date to be baptized? How many attended church? How many did you bring to church with you? How many did you teach with a Mormon member present? And how many did you teach without a Mormon member present? Because when you teach an investigator with a member present, they assume the connection is better. You have a friend. You're introducing a friend to them. And then you have progressing investigators. How many people are you taking care of who are progressing towards baptism? And then you have referrals received and contacted, new investigators this week, lessons taught to recent converts or less active members. Less active means someone doesn't go to church. And finding time in our case. So how much time have you spent out there knocking on doors, talking to people on the street, that kind of stuff.
So if you ask any question whatsoever about Mormonism, like I have done, they call you an investigator because they think you are investigating their religion.
Correct. That's right. You are an investigator. Interesting name. Yeah. And all those KPIs revolve around investigators and their journey from being a stranger to being a member. And yes, you report them every week. And there is quite a lot of, I'd say, how can I put it? There is a lot of pressure to perform. But I have to be honest, in my case, I was actually a very hardworking missionary, so I didn't really feel that the pressure was very high. But I think some people do feel it, yeah.
Right. Okay, so you've had quite a few interesting experiences, I know you've told me. Obviously being young and out in another country, even though it's another English-speaking country, you experience all kinds of people, and they're not always happy to hear the Mormon message, are they?
That's the way to put it, especially in England. Yeah. So, yes, let's talk about the basics. So the basics is most people say the following two words to you: not interested. And obviously that is great. that they are not interested. I look at that now and I'm like, thank you, people, for being sort of immunized against this. Um, most people are respectful. Like most people are civil. They'll just say, "I'm not interested. Please go away." I do remember someone kicking us off their property once. So we actually knocked on a person's door and they said, "Get off my property," and they watched us walk off. They like stared at us all the way out. It was yeah, but at the same time, I look at that now from my perspective, and I'm like, I don't really blame people for being so ticked off with Mormon missionaries, because they're just so persistent and they're always in your face, basically trying to share, their beliefs.
Well, like I said to
So
you, two came to my door just yesterday out of nowhere. And usually, as you know, I speak to them. I just wasn't in the mood yesterday.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So just no, the Mormon missionaries have no concept of, I mean, or little concept of what it's like to be polite. So, I mean, just for knocking on people's doors, many people called us rude, rightly so. Just saying, we're having dinner and you're just coming here and knocking on our door, right? Or it's 9:30 at night and, 8:30, 9:30 is too late. 8:30 at night and, we're just about to go home. And, you're knocking on doors and, the kids are already asleep and, it's very, very rude, frankly. So yeah, we had a lot of people say that. But now to go to the exceptional cases. So I was attacked twice in 2 years. The first time was about a year out. I was training a new missionary, and I was walking down the street with a missionary. It was, late at night, or it was winter, so feels like late at night, but it was like 6 p.m. or whatever. And these kids, just teenagers, picked up these rocks and started throwing them at us and chasing us. So it wasn't too harmful. We just sort of ran away and ran around the corner. Never got hurt or anything. But the second experience was way worse. So it was right close to the end of my mission. I was in Manchester. Around Manchester, there's this sort of ring of sort of really rough areas. And I was in one of those rough areas one day. I'm out on the street walking towards the guy. There's only one guy on the street. And I raise my hand to greet him, and I want to talk to him, good day, sir, blah, 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 blah. And he had a bulldog there, and he had a chain, but the chain wasn't on the dog. The chain was in his hand. And he didn't say anything. He just took this chain and whacked me around the head. So yeah, injured, he wrapped around my head and smacked me on the right-hand side. I was knocked like to the ground immediately. Like I don't know if I lost consciousness for a moment, but basically it was very painful and I was like on the floor. So my companion, who was with me at the time, he sprints across the road and elbows the guy in the face and knocks him to the floor. And then the guy sort of wanders up and keeps walking. And so I go to hospital and we contact the police. And turns out that the guy had gone on to rob a liquor store and take some drinks, that kind of stuff.
See, this is what you should be trained for in the MTC.
Yeah, they don't give you martial training in the MTC. I mean, this goes without saying, and I know all listeners will agree. Like, you can disagree with people, and you can be disrespectful towards them, but physical violence is obviously out of the question. So yes, that was the worst experience that I had. But I recovered from it, of course. Just as people do, say when you get mugged or whatever, you recover emotionally. So yeah, I was fine. But yeah, it sucked.
Now, I know that when I go out, I encounter not only Mormons, but certainly a lot of other religious proselytizers, and you have Jehovah's Witnesses on the street corners. I mean, what happens when you see a pair of JWs? Do you speak to them, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So I often ran across JWs. I have many memories of conversations with them. The key because they don't disclose their identity up front, they just start talking with you about the Bible, and so it's difficult to know like what religion they're from. But then, without fail, they will come to talk about what is God's name. And then at that point, I'm like, oh, here we go. Yeah, I know who you are.
Jehovah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think that's
So,
incorrect, though. But anyway,
well, yeah, I agree with you.
they didn't have a J in those days.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you about God's name not being anything that humans could define.
Well, yeah,
Or there maybe even
exactly.
not being in God. Yeah. So I do have a funny story to tell though with J-Dub. So one time this guy, we went and booked an appointment with a guy, and he thought it would just be hilariously funny and it was, in hindsight, I'm laughing at it. It was hilariously funny. He thought it'd be hilariously funny if he went and found the Jehovah's Witnesses and booked an appointment at exactly the same time at his house. So we drive up to the guy's house and we park the car, and just 2 minutes before us, or sorry, we're waiting because we're a bit early, and then another car pulls up and the two J-Dubs walk into his house. And we walk into his house and we sit down, and he has this grin from ear to ear. You know, he is just really entertained by this. And he's sitting there, he's like, welcome, you know. And the two J-Dubs are sitting there and we're sitting there. And he just wanted to watch us spar, basically. So again, same thing happened. So they're like, okay, you know, share your message. They're like, oh yeah, blah, 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 God, prophets, this and that. And then they're like, what is God's name? And then I knew, oh, this is going to go downhill from here. So we actually, as missionaries, we're sort of trained to understand who are time wasters. So it's not it's not easy to waste the time of a missionary. They will know that you have a hidden agenda most often. So when that happened, we immediately knew what had happened. And we just said, thanks, guys, bye. And we just left. So missionaries won't really spar. They won't really, or some of them will, like some of them so-called Bible bashing, which is a ridiculous thing. But yeah, most often missionaries, at least in our time and culture, they're taught when their time is being wasted, and they try to avoid that. So yeah, and I'll tell some other quick stories about run-in with other religions. So we once met an Anglican vicar in one of my areas. We went to the big vicarage. He had this beautiful house, and we knock on, and he lets us in because he's this nice Anglican guy, and Church of England. And we sit down, and basically, me and my companion, my friend, we tell him that he is in a false church, and he knows it, and he's taking money by being in a false church, and he's like abusing other people. So basically, we just walked in there and told him that he's making money off his religion and it's wrong. So I don't think he exactly gave us tea and cookies after that. I think he just sent us on our way.
Is that typical of Mormon missionaries to just be bold like that?
In the training book, Preach My Gospel, it has a sentence that says, boldness shows love.
Oh.
So really, they have this perception that when you're being bold, you're showing people love, which is silly. So yes, it is. Some missionaries are more reasonable than others. Some are bolder than others. But you will always run into that missionary, that Mormon missionary, who is just ultra bold, super brazen, doesn't really care, just very rude, that kind of thing. So yeah, I hope I wasn't like that. I don't think I was, but yeah, we had that experience. We also met a few Anglican scholars one time, and we would sit down. I actually really enjoyed this because they were just nice guys. They were young, and we went to their house many times, me and my companion, and we would just sit there debating all sorts of Christian doctrine stuff. And it was actually quite enjoyable, mainly because they were just genuine, nice guys. And I'll get to this in a little bit later, but Mormon missionaries often are very bored. And they're often, if they can find a way, I don't want to say it in this way, but it's probably true. If they can find a way to waste time somewhere, they usually do. So if you're nice to them and you invite them in, they most often in many cases with Mormon missionaries, they will just sit there with you as long as you'll let them, because they don't want to go back outside, right? And it sucks to be outside knocking on doors. It's nicer to be in your house with you. So yeah, as a missionary, I had experiences like that. So it was nice because we could just hang out with these random Anglican guys debating Adam and Eve instead of being out knocking on doors, which is super boring. Yeah, and that's about it. I say the last run-in with other religions is when I sparked discussions in town centers in England. So I'd have like 5 or 6 people, because some town centers are just really, I think yours is the same, just really full of religious people all the time. And so I would sit there and then I'd start talking with this guy, and then the second and third and fourth people would come in, and it just turned into this big dogfight about Catholics are stabbing people and Church of England this, and just really entertaining but really stupid at the same time.
I know, I've witnessed a few of those myself, when somebody from one Baptist church will be talking to another person who's preaching from a different Baptist church, and they'll be arguing. I think, well, aren't you guys on the same side?
Yeah, that's no, they're splitting hairs, right? That's exactly what they're doing. Yeah.
Sean, we can't actually talk about being a young Mormon missionary without talking about sexuality and what goes on in that department. And I know that obviously you're not allowed to have any relationships. Obviously, things like masturbation are very much controlled. I don't know how they do that. But what happens? What happens when, for instance, somebody comes on to you? Did you have like girls come up to you and say, we like you guys? And what happens when that goes on?
Yeah. So at a basic level, some girls in England, young, confident British girls in large groups, they just thought it was funny to, as you described, come on to missionaries. I mean, 2 sharply dressed, mainly American white boys, and they'll just come and like touch up to them, and they're really just teasing. They're just trying to make them feel uncomfortable. I actually had that happen a few times on my mission. I would have like a random woman come up and like kiss me on the cheek or kiss my hand or that kind of thing, and they're really just playing around. There have been cases in the past, however, that I'm aware of in Britain, probably in the 80s, where Mormon missionaries have been raped by women. This is quite a long time ago now, but they abducted a missionary. I don't remember the exact details. It's in a book that I read, but they abducted a missionary and raped him and then released him. And I think they might have recorded it and stuff like that. So yeah, I didn't have that happen to me. But yes, basic girls being funny. But aside from that, within Mormonism, it is quite a normal thing for young women to fall in love with missionaries. So and vice versa. So in one of my areas that I came, I was aware that I was replacing a missionary who had left because he had sort of developed an ambiguous relationship with one of the girls there. I know for myself, I'd say there was only one time I ever had a sort of crush on a girl who was there, but it wasn't really serious. I know a couple had crushes on me. In fact, one girl who I taught and baptized after my mission, she wrote to me on Facebook and basically just came out emotionally and said, I really, really like you, and I want to be with you. Problem is, I just moved to Sydney, and England was very far away, and I wasn't interested in this girl at all. But yes, this kind of thing happens. You have this relationship developing, you can imagine, between a missionary and an investigator or young members, and this is extremely common, extremely normal, because they spend a lot of time together at activities or teaching investigators or that kind of thing, at church, that kind of thing.
This is when you're encouraged to lock your heart, isn't it? I think it's called.
That's right. So they have an exact term they tell missionaries to lock your heart, which basically says don't even think about it, don't develop any relationships at all. Now, in the extreme cases, missionaries have basically split off and had sex with girls in their houses. Um, and in those situations, it's very tricky because, you know, you're supposed to be within eyesight of your companion. And so the companion is supposed to report you. And if they don't, then they're sort of in on it and they get in trouble too if it's ever discovered. And if they do, most often they get in trouble anyway. So both of them will get sent home often. So one missionary sleeps with the girl, second missionary reports it, both of them are sent home. Because he shouldn't have let his companion go sleep with a girl in the first place. So yeah, that's the more extreme case. In some other cases, they will emergency transfer a missionary. So they'll just, within 3-4 hours of becoming aware of what happened, the mission president, which is a leader, he'll just send them out of the area to another area right then. You talked about masturbation as a topic. That's an interesting one. So there are sort of two subcultures in Mormon missionaries. There's the subculture where they just don't listen to the rhetoric about how masturbation is evil, and they don't care, and they do it anyway. And they're actually sort of more healthy, normal young men because, frankly, what is it, 90-something% of young men masturbate, and the last other percent are lying, right? That was the statistic. So there's the side that just ignore the culture and live healthy lives and do that kind of stuff. And then there's the side that actually get caught up in the fact that masturbation is an evil sin and you shouldn't do it. And that side actually confesses to the leaders. So I've actually discussed this with some ex-missionary, ex-Mormon friends of mine. And we reckon that the leaders get phone calls all the time from missionaries masturbating. Just, wake up in the morning, mission president, oh, I feel guilty, I masturbated last night. Okay, elder so-and-so, just don't do it again. Poor mission president probably sitting there getting all these weird, awkward phone calls. But it's the culture of guilt, right? It's the culture of your natural instincts as a human being are evil, and you should stay away from them and that kind of thing. And so that causes an immense amount of unnecessary suffering, and it did in me as well. So I'm sad to say that I was part of the second group, the group that would feel bad about it, would call the mission president, that kind of stuff, for something that's so extremely normal for all young men. So yeah, it's silly, really. I also had people tease us about masturbation a lot. Like you'd go out walking on the street, and young British people, hey mate, do you jack off? Blah 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 blah, and just quite funny and awkward. Yeah.
I mean, it can't have been all been bad times and depression and homesickness. I mean, you did actually get to go to another country. I nearly said for free, but it's not for free, isn't it? Because you probably pay for most of it yourself. But I mean, you must have had some good times over here.
Absolutely. As you know, the British summer is really beautiful. So in some areas, my happiest times as a missionary were when I was in bike areas. So I'd ride the bike everywhere. So I had plenty of time outdoors. I mean, imagine that your life is basically from 10 a.m. till 9 p.m. British summer, so the sun only goes down at 10:30. And you're out on the bike for like 4 or 5 hours a day. You're just riding around in the summer. So you can imagine that can be really, really beautiful. I had plenty of time to myself when I was in those kinds of areas, plenty of time to think about all sorts of things. I thought a lot about language when I was a missionary. I sort of discovered epistemology. Etymology. Sort of discovered etymology in my head while thinking about the connections between words like convince and invincible and hearing the similarities. So, just sitting there and thinking about random things. Yeah, so pretty good. Playing sports. Missionaries love playing sports because, frankly, knocking on doors sucks and it's boring, and playing soccer is fun. So they play as much soccer as they can. In my case, I played soccer in the UK a lot. Really enjoyed it. Football, sorry. Just call it football. I've been out of the country for long. You were wondering if I actually had played football, right? Calling it soccer. Yeah. So yeah, played soccer. There was one experience I had when I was from South Africa. I'd never seen snow. I was with a couple of missionary friends. It was snowing heavily. Our car got stuck in a big traffic jam. We just pulled over the car and we just rolled around in the snow and we built snowmans and we laughed and we took pictures and we just had a really jolly time. And that sort of reminds you that missionaries are still 19, 20, 21-year-old boys. And sometimes that just comes out. Sometimes they do stupid things. I actually have a friend of mine who who happens to be the person who trained my trainer, the missionary who trained my trainer, who's now also an ex-Mormon, and he lives in Sydney, and we're good mates. And he got sent home off his mission. I think it was for vandalizing a bus stop or something like that. So yeah, just missionaries can do silly, stupid things. Yeah.
But even when you were like enjoying yourself on the bikes and in the snow and everything, I'm hoping you didn't feel guilty at the end of it, did you? For enjoying yourself?
It's hard to say. Yeah, no, that's a good question, because there's such a culture of guilt. In that case, I don't think so. But sometimes yes. Like in one of my areas, I was working with a couple of other missionaries, and it's probably my most casual point in my mission. Like we were just doing a lot of sort of just hanging out at people's houses and stuff like that, and actually felt very guilty for that. Felt guilty for going to a friend's house and hanging out for a few hours. Yeah.
Oh gosh. And of course, you're with the same person, who you call your companion, all the time. How much of it is it a case of you're going to get on each other's nerves, or on the other side, you could become great friends with this person and learn a lot about him?
Yeah, both. Absolutely. So I worked with missionaries from just a quick overview, because I actually still remember almost all of them. So Norway, Spain, Romania, a couple from the US, from the East and the West, South Africa, Australia, a British missionary. So basically people from all over the world, or African missionaries. Yeah. So let's put it this way. Some of them become close friends. Some of them you learn to tolerate each other. And when you're stuck with the same person 24/7 for 3 months, for example, which is often the duration of time you're with the same person, then yeah, if you're tolerating each other, it can be really tough. You can get on each other's nerves. When you find missionaries outdoors, and especially in your town center, most often you'll probably see them separate from each other. They'll be within eyesight, but they'll be separate, talking to people.
Yes.
One of the reasons is they're just getting out of each other's hair for a little bit of time, So they're out and they're separate because they're together all the time, all day, every day. So, but some of my favorite, positive experiences as a missionary were, let's say, for example, I'm with a missionary friend of mine, especially a new missionary. New missionaries have, watched movies that you haven't watched or read books that you haven't read, because they only just started being a missionary. So, for example, I have a very beautiful memory of one. It was a very foggy, beautiful winter's morning out near Birmingham. I'm out with this new missionary. We're knocking on doors. No one's at home, which is the best time to knock at doors, because no one answers. You could just keep walking around aimlessly, basically. And he told me about the last Harry Potter book, which I hadn't read, which had come out while I was a missionary. So he just literally spent 4 hours explaining the whole book to me, and it was really, interesting and fun memory. And so some of my favorite memories were so-called tracting conversations, where you just sit and you're with someone who's interesting, like a missionary who's interesting, who's read stuff, or who has certain hobbies, and you just talk and talk and talk about them.
So you
talk at length,
about
in detail.
Mormonism in your spare time, if you can help it.
Let me put it this way. Again, it can be so cultish that the mission leaders will encourage you to never talk about anything else. but Mormonism, but spirituality, that kind of thing. Frankly, it can be like that. Or they will tell you when you go visit Mormon members in their homes and have dinner with them, for example, don't talk about your life at home. Don't talk about your hobbies. Just talk about Mormonism, talk about spirituality, that kind of thing. But frankly, it doesn't happen that way, or it doesn't work that way. And some people are a little bit more lenient than others. And so, yes, you'll have these. For example, you have what I mentioned earlier: exchanges. You swap missionary companions for one day, and then you meet someone completely new, and then you do your missionary work, but you basically get to hang out with a new person, and you don't have books, you don't have the internet, and so you just talk. And I learned a lot about, for example, World Wars One and Two from a missionary who happened to have studied those in university, and we had a 5-6 hour conversation about it while we were knocking on doors.
Well, it's actually quite a good thing, because today, when you look at kids that age, they're together, but they're staring into their phones and they're not really talking to each other. So
that's right. So that's an interesting positive thing that happened as a result. I learned to. I was sort of shy, sort of introverted before being a missionary, and being a missionary, facing so much rejection, talking to so many people. I mean, thousands of people in the period of 2 years. It changed me. It made me able to talk to people, not nervous at all, to just approach someone on the street and talk to them randomly all the time. So yeah, it was positive in that way.
But of course, eventually, as we now know, there were some seeds of doubt. And how exactly did that start to happen? Are you on your mission, or was it just after your mission, or when did this happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So throughout my entire mission, I was a fully believing, fully engaged Mormon, and for many years afterwards. In fact, only until about 3 years ago now. So, however, there were, as you said, seeds of doubt planted in my mind as a missionary from some people. And in my case, at least, those seeds added up with other seeds of doubt, added up with intense research, led to me not believing in Mormonism anymore. So it's interesting to backtrack and go back to what were those seeds that were planted, and how were they planted, and how effective was that. And now I'll mention to your viewers, as you and I have been discussing, you and I and some other friends of mine here, we're actually working on a framework to challenge missionaries right now. So we're working on a way to effectively get through to them, which I'm the primary author of and will be testing. And I actually have 2 people who are willing to pilot this completely independently in 2 different countries at the moment before we release it. So I've taken my knowledge as being a missionary and my knowledge of what kinds of challenges worked and didn't, and understanding of how missionaries are raised to do their work, and we're actually going to build something. But to answer your question, probably the most effective seed of doubt that was planted in me was extremely simple. I was in my first area, and I talked to this old guy who was clearly a very intelligent, potentially an academic in some university. And he had this, long, nice beard. And he basically turned to me and he just asked me one simple question. He said to me, "Have you read Darwin?" And I said, "Who's Darwin? What's Darwin?" Right? And then all he said was, "Read Darwin." And he walked off. And, I'll never know his name. He'll probably never know me. He'll never know the impact that simple, short conversation had on me. But I remembered to read Darwin. And knowing, obviously, Charles Darwin, person who discovered evolution or created the model, obviously that's a key part of understanding why modern religions are false or flawed, because so many of them don't understand evolution. So yes, that was a crucial and extremely simple interaction. There were other examples where I met someone would meet with us, and they would print out a whole bunch of so-called anti-Mormon literature, and they would give us a whole stack of papers all about Joseph Smith and his wives and blah 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 blah. And I'll tell you why that doesn't work. Missionaries are trained to not read anything else. Of course, you might find occasionally a missionary who you give that to and they will read it because they are quote unquote disobedient. They won't follow the rules like the others do. But in my case, I was a very straight down the line missionary. And so when he gave us a stack of papers, I took it home and I threw it in the bin. And then being in the worldview that I had, I'm not going to joke with you, I actually felt like these papers had brought a sort of evil spirit into our apartment. And so I took them out of the bin and I threw them in the outside bin, the big bin outside. So I mean, there's just this small amount of cognitive dissonance, right? Just there's this stack of paper that has contradictory things about Mormonism, and you can see how powerful the worldview is. I thought there were evil spirits in my apartment, trying to get me to doubt Jesus and God and Joseph Smith and so on. So the stack of papers didn't work. The short Darwin comment did. But it's hard for you to know if you just pass a shorthand comment to someone, what that comment might do 10 years later or might not do.
Okay, Sean, I think also at some point you had some leadership opportunities where you were able to train other missionaries. Is that right?
Yeah, so I trained two missionaries, and I managed groups of missionaries. There are different leaders, or there are different ranks of missionary leadership. So there's what's called a district leader, a zone leader, and an assistant to the president, which is the highest rank. As you can tell by the term, that person is the assistant to the mission president. And so I got to zone leader, which is the second highest rank. There is a huge culture of aspiration within missionaries. Missionaries really want to be leaders, but at the same time there's sort of a backlash idea that you're not supposed to want to be a leader. So there's this, you're hit with a sort of double whammy. Missionaries simultaneously aspire to be leaders, and everyone knows that missionaries aspire, but you're not supposed to, and it's really weird. But the result of that is a culture of brown nosing. So you will have a case where there's a lot of leader worship. I mean, this is very common in religions, right? And people just loving their leaders, and I learned this great thing from this leader, and what a wonderful thing they said that taught me this, and blah blah blah, and humbled me, and blah blah blah. So when I was a missionary, I observed this behavior extensively in missionaries, just this trying to gain favor from your leaders and trying to aspire up the chain of leadership. And what's interesting is later on, when I was doing my intense research into Mormonism that led to me not believing in it anymore, I actually wrote a book, and the book's name is Of Pretension. And as the title suggests, it's a book about pretension. And I wrote that book based on ideas that I collected as a missionary in the ranks of leadership, and observing the ranks of leadership, and observing the interactions between missionaries and their leaders, and especially the pretense, the amount of pretending to be someone you're not, that happened between those different ranks. So yeah, it was an interesting thing to observe. It's definitely a huge phenomenon. Many missionaries and ex-missionaries will acknowledge openly that's the case. So yes, when you meet a random missionary on the street, they are really trying to get their numbers up so that they can have high KPIs, so that they can become, the next rank. It's sort of like a video game.
Gosh, I mean, this has been really fascinating, Sean. But if there is a young Mormon who's watching this, perhaps very curious, and has found out now all these things which happen on the missionary trail, and he or she is about to take the plunge, would you have anything to say to them right now?
That's a really good question. If I could speak to myself 10 years ago, because I'm 29 now, I was 19 then, just before going on a mission, it's hard to know what I would say to myself, because I was so immersed in Mormonism. I was so immersed in my family, their expectations that I would be a missionary, and not just family, but friends as well. and my own aspirations to be a missionary. And it's really, really hard to know, even though I know myself extremely well, of course, it's really hard to know what I could have said to connect to that young man who is about to go on a mission. But what I will say is this: I had no doubts at that stage. And so, although mission was hard for me, mission is even harder for a young man who has doubts, because you're in a situation where you are preaching something you're not sure of yourself. And that's intellectually, psychologically, that's an incredibly difficult situation to be in. So if I could speak to any young men who are thinking about going out now, and if I could say anything about doubt, I will say, as I once saw on a Bill Maher presentation, doubt is humble. Doubt is that honest, skeptical voice within you saying, "What if I'm wrong?" And if you know Mormonism like I do, there are very few honest people walking around, probably none, saying, "What if I'm wrong?" So that's all I would say to a young missionary or a young man preparing to go on a mission. If you have any doubts, realize that doubt is sincere, doubt is honesty, doubt is integrity, doubt is humility. It's someone being humble and saying, "I don't know, I might be wrong." And you should listen to that voice because it's a very honest part of you. But if you have absolutely no doubts, you probably are not watching this video. You're probably not on YouTube channels like this. But if someone has absolutely no doubts, I don't really know what to say to them to connect, except for good luck. Yeah.
Okay, that's really great, Sean. Thanks so much for talking to us. And I think that's a really fascinating insight into the world of the everyday life of the Mormon missionary. So, yeah, hopefully we'll catch up with you again in the very near future and talk, who knows, Mormon temple rituals, perhaps? Or
Sure.
who
No
knows?
problem.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
absolutely. Thanks so much, Mark. It's been awesome.